Hi, this is Kimberly. I will be doing the full Jennifer and Joseph Rosenbaum trial. They were the foster parents that were accused of murdering 21-month-old Layla Daniel. And this happened in 2015, and it didn't go to trial until 2019. There's a huge story that goes along with this. And it was actually quite a long trial. I think it was 9 days, maybe 10. I'm going to be doing this trial much like I did the McNabb and Bell trial. Some of you enjoyed it and some of you didn't, but this trial it grabbed my heart and I'm very interested in it. The McNabb trial, I wasn't able to watch the whole thing while it was going on, so it was fun for me to do the full trial. So I will be doing the same thing with this trial, if that makes sense. I'm sure it does, right? What Kimberly is attempting to say is she never got to see the entire trial. She missed big chunks of it. It's very good. It's the same medical examiner that was at the Bell and McNabb trial. I love that lady, Dr. Dasha. Anyway, I'm gushing now and fangirling over her, but okay, I'll see you in all the episodes of the trial. Be patient with her, okay? Actually, I had started posting videos when the trial was going on and I never got to finish. I got to doing other things. I'm going to start from the beginning again so I can have them in sequential order. And I'm going to do the same thing I did with McNabb and Bell. And that's the only thing I cut out is the long breaks and pauses. You don't miss anything and it's sped up that way. It's just smooth, uninterrupted. In short, it cuts out all the bullshit. You're welcome. I do hope you enjoy this. It's not going to be the only thing I'm working on. I have a lot of stuff in the works that I've had on the back burner for a while that I'm going to start working on too. Well, I am working on it and have been, and that's why I've been gone a lot. Plus, I got lost on 𝐻𝐢𝐻𝐿 Island, but I think I'm more acclimated now. I found a little hut and a hammock and it's secluded, so I can work. To give you an idea of what it's like, picture Gilligan's Island. It's very much like that. And I'm staying in Mr. and Mrs. Howell's hut. Yeah, I know, right? So this is day one of the opening statements with Dasha Young and Corinne Mull. I really like Miss Young. She's very sharp and very, very, very good prosecutor. I hope you enjoy. Much love and peace. As always, thank you for listening.
Since 2015, these defendants have been putting on a facade. But during this trial, they will be exposed to you as the liars, the abusers, and the murderers that they are. The dictionary defines facade as an outward appearance that is maintained to conceal an unpleasant reality. This is the Rosenbaum's home. It's a facade because on the outside, it appears to be a place of safety. It appeared to be the place where two young girls who had lived an unstable life from the time they were born would finally have a safe home to land in. But the reality, it was a home of terror and a home of horror and a home where Layla Daniels was murdered. These defendants are a facade. They appear to be nice, kind, and loving. That's how they presented themselves to everyone in 2015 when they wanted to get Millie Place and Layla Daniel. They appear to be that protection that these girls would finally have. But the reality, they are liars, abusers, and murderers. They were not protectors. Jennifer Rosenbaum was an abuser. You heard heard the judge read the indictment. Unknown manners, 49 charges. We don't know what she did to those babies, but we know she beat them. I'll rephrase that, Your Honor. The evidence will show that they are abusers, liars, and murderers. The evidence will show that Jennifer Rosenbaum beat Layla Daniels and she beat Millie Place unmercifully. We don't know if she kicked him, if she stumped him, or she punched him, but we know she did something to him to cause extreme damage. And Joseph Rosenbaum sat by and did nothing. Just let it happen. And that's why they are sitting here before you today. And the tears of facade. Now, ladies and gentlemen, these girls, they did not have the best start. Their mom, Tessa Daniels, she was addicted to drugs since she was a teenager. She struggled. Their life was unstable, unpredictable, and unreliable with her. She drugged them from place to place, home to home, and you'll hear sometimes she left them with strangers that she only knew for a matter of minutes. Their fathers, Jacob Place and Anthony Daniel, they were in and out of jail, not really a part of these girls' lives. So people believed from the moment that they came into this world, they were in harm's way, that they would not have that safety and the protection that they needed, that they deserved as young girls. So in May of 2015, when these, what the evidence will show as liars and abusers and murderers showed up, everybody had a sigh of relief because that facade was there. They were dressed well, they spoke well, they were educated and homeowners. Finally, these girls are going to be safe. Finally, they're going to have the protection that they need and they deserve. But that wasn't the reality at all. They were they were in more danger with these defendants than they were with anybody that they passed through the hands of over the course of their short lives. Now, on November the 17th, the facade came crumbling down. They were exposed. They were exposed to EMT, hospital staff, police officers, and defects workers for who they truly were. And that's why we're here today, because of those events that came to light on November the 17th. Now, the judge read you the indictment in this case, and he will tell you that the state has the burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. That means that we must prove each and every count of that indictment, each element of those charges, to you beyond a reasonable doubt. And as the state, we take that very seriously. We want to make sure that we meet our burden. So over the course of this trial, you will hear from everyone, family members, family friends, doctors, anyone who cared for these children. So you can understand that the danger they were in were when they were with these defendants, no one else. Now, you'll hear from, like I said, a lot of people. And at times it may get confusing because it's a lot to keep up with. So I ask you guys to have notepads in front of you. I ask that you take notes, write down dates, write down events, because you're going to have to recall it. Although we have a court reporter, you won't get a transcript to go back there with you. So I ask that you be attentive throughout the entire trial. Even when it seems to be daunting, we need you to pay attention. These girls need you to pay attention. Now, it's funny to me that criminal trials usually start at the end of something. The end of an armed robbery, the end of a shoplifting, the end of a rape. In this case, and unfortunately, at the end of Layla's life. But I think it's important for you to know the beginning, to know how we got here. You'll hear from Peggy Banks, who is the great-grandmother of Millie Place and Layla Daniels. She's probably the most stable person in these girls' lives. But unfortunately, due to her age and health conditions, she wasn't always able to get the girls and take them in and give them that safety and protection that they needed. She was there, but she could not have them where she was physically all the time. And then you had Regina Banks and Richard Clendenny, the girls' grandparents. And you'll hear for years they struggled with drugs, and they just were not people of safety for these girls. And I told you about Tessa Clendenny. This is a girl's mother. As I stated, Tessa was young. She struggled with drug addiction, and to be quite honest, she's still struggling. And you'll hear from her. She's going to come into court and she's going to testify. And she's lost a child and she's still dealing with drugs. But what she's going to tell you, you will be able to find based on the evidence that she is credible. That her girls, when they were with her, no harm came to them. Now, Millie Place is the oldest. She was born in 2011, and her father is Jacob Place. And Anthony Daniel, and when Tessa broke up with Jacob Place, her and Anthony Daniel began to date, and they had a child, Layla Daniel. Layla was born on July the 18th of 2013. Millie was born on October 4th, 2011. She likes to tell you can remember it by saying 10-4. You'll hear from Millie, and she will come in and she will talk to you about what she endured and what she can remember, because I want you to remember she was very young when this happened, ladies and gentlemen. But she's going to come in here and she's going to do the best that she can to explain to you what happened to her when she was in the hands of these defendants. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I told you they went from hand to hand, over the course of literally a year. Probably for the first year of Millie's life, things seemed to be pretty stable. She was with Tessa and Jacob. They lived together, and they seemed to be doing fine. Tessa was working, Jacob was working. They were living in the house of Regina Banks. Now, there was an incident that I'm sure the defense would let you know about, that I believe it was the beginning of 2013. It was New Year's Day. Millie got outside. She was probably a little bit over a year old, and she was walking down the street. Someone saw her, called the police, and 𝐓𝐫𝐻𝐷 came in. They came in, they didn't take Millie away. They said they didn't find her having injuries, any issues. They told the parents, you need to lock the doors, you need to put those secure locks. If anybody has small kids, how you put those locks on the doors to keep them from going out. Sometimes it keeps the adults from going out too. But they put those on and everything was fine. Then at some point in time, Tessa and Jacob Place, they parted ways. And she began to date Anthony. Shortly after Layla was born, almost 2 months later, Anthony Daniel was arrested, and Tessa fell apart. She relapsed. She just couldn't take it anymore, and she went missing. During that time, she was staying with her mother and Anthony's sister, 𝐬𝐲𝐿 Daniel, who you'll hear from. And from about September of 2013 to July of 2014, Layla stayed with Regina and 𝐬𝐿. They moved to different apartments, but they kept Layla with them. They both were working. They made sure that they had a babysitter to take care of her while they were at work, and then they would come home and take care of her during that time. Millie, she wasn't with 𝐬𝐿 and Regina. Tessa kept her with her. As her firstborn, she kind of clung on to Millie. So Millie would be with her sometimes. If she wasn't with Millie, she would have her with her great-grandmother, Peggy. And then in July of 2014, Regina and 𝐬𝐿 lost their apartment. They had to move in with a friend, Cynthia Tate, who was someone that they worked with, and her daughter, Tiffany Shaw. And while they were living there, Tiffany Shaw began to take care of Layla. She also had a son that was around the same age as Layla, and she basically will tell you that she just kind of raised them like twins. They were just a few days apart. And they stayed there with her for almost a year. At some point in time, 𝐷FACS got involved, and they made them as a safety plan for these girls. And they would come and check and make sure that they were okay. And you'll hear that everything was fine when they were living with Cynthia Tate and Tiffany Shaw. Sometime between July and September of 2014, Tessa got Millie, and she brought her over to the Tate's house. And while at the Tate's house, Tiffany Shaw's dad and stepmom was there. Tessa knew that she had a probation warrant and that she was going to be going to jail. So she talked to the Chapmans and she said, hey, I need someone to take my baby. Can y'all please just take her and watch her for me until I get myself straightened out? The Chapmans were elated because they couldn't have kids. So this was an opportunity for them to have a beautiful little girl in their house that they can just doll up and just really just give her all the love that they had in their hearts. And that's what they did. And she stayed with them for a few months. And you'll hear Peggy, Millie being her first great-grand, had a special bond with her. and she would go and she would visit Millie. But the Chapmans lived up in Jelani, and that was a far drive for Peggy. And it just got to the point where she couldn't make that drive anymore. And she probably did something that wasn't the best choice. Jacob showed up one month, and she said, hey, let's go get Millie. They rode up to Delonja, they grabbed Millie, put her in a car, and drove off. As you can imagine, the Chapmans lost their mind. They're like, what is going on? This baby that we thought we were going to have is gone. They called the police. The police came out, and 𝐓𝐥𝐻 got involved. And because there was no legal paperwork or any information to really say, hey, the Chapmans could have them, they tried to reach out to Tessa. They got Tessa, and Tessa, you know, said, well, if my great-grandmother wants her, let her go with my great-grandmother. At that time, 𝐓𝐥𝐻 said, well, the Tates are already a safety plan for Layla. Layla will go with the Tates as well. Millie will go with the Tates as well. So for a few months, Millie and Layla lived with Cynthia Tate and Tiffany Shaw. And you will see photographs of when these girls were with them. They were there just being loved on, being cared for. But at some point, Millie began to want to be with her great-grandmother, because that's what she was used to. That was the stability, the constant that she had in her life. And so the Tates, they acquiesced and said, you know what, Peggy, you can take her. Millie wants to be with you. So probably right before Christmas, Millie goes to live with Peggy. But Layla stays with the Tates. And I tell you all of this, ladies and gentlemen, because I want you to understand how these girls were cared for, how they were loved on throughout this whole time. And they remained there until about April of 2015. And the Tates just got a little tired because 𝐓𝐥𝐻 was coming in. They wanted to check Lucas, who is Tiffany Shaw's son, and she said, enough is enough. I just can't do this anymore. 𝐓𝐥𝐻, you have to figure out where these kids, where Layla can go, because I can't take care of her anymore. 𝐓𝐥𝐻 stepped in, and because they wanted the girls together, they began to reach out to different family members. Who will take these two sisters together? Because that's all really they had, were each other. So 𝐓𝐥𝐻 wanted to keep them together. They only had one family member that was willing to take in both the girls, and that was Elaine Place. And you'll hear, she only kept them for 2 days, unfortunately. And she just said, I can't do this anymore. And at that point, 𝐓𝐥𝐻 said, you know what, we're stepping in and we're going to put them in foster care. And they ended up being with Miss Loretta Brown in April of 2015. And they were only there for a short period. I told you these babies just jumped around, just no stability. And with Miss Loretta Brown, they were good. They were fine. You'll see pictures, you'll see videos of how they were just happy, loving little girls, just enjoying life despite the hand they had been dealt. But then in June of 2015, Miss Loretta had an incident at her house that didn't involve the girls, and 𝐓𝐥𝐻 said, we got to move them out. Yet another move for the girls. Then they ended up going to the Lamberts. And you'll hear from Miss Lambert, she's been a foster parent for years. And she's one of those good, dedicated foster parents. She takes notes, she makes sure that the caseworker is doing their job, and if these babies come back looking some kind of way, she is going to notate it and tell somebody. And you're going to hear about the notes that she made once these defendants stepped into the picture. Because like I told you, in May of 2015, the defendant, being, the evidence will show, being on Facebook, found Tessa Clendon, saw pictures of her girls. And I'm sure the defense is going to tell you, because they got to live up to that facade and the appearance, that Ms. Rosenbaum was a third-year law student at Emory Law School. She was interning at the DA's office. She was running for county commissioner. Facade. But they bought it. And she said, oh, I'm in court. I saw your girls. I want to help you out. My prayers are with you. I'm willing to take them in. And so 𝐓𝐥𝐻, believing what they saw on the outside, began to allow the girls to visit with the Rosenbaums. And eventually, at some point in July, they were placed there with them permanently, July 24th of 2015. And they remained there with the Rosenbaums until November 17th of 2015, when Layla was killed. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what I think is kind of interesting is a telltale sign of who these defendants really are, is that one of the first visits that they had with Layla, she ended up in a hospital room. In her last day, her last breath, her last moment on life with them ended her up in a hospital room. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I believe throughout this trial, there are going to be a lot of lies that you are going to hear. Because the defendant, they spin a web of lies from beginning to end. That's what the evidence is going to show. I'm not even going, because the judge is going to tell you, you don't believe what I say. Believe what comes from that witness stand and the evidence that is presented throughout this trial. And that evidence is going to show they are liars. Every moment they got, they lied. From the moment that they began to seek out these girls, because they sought them out. The history, how they got the girls. You'll hear, and I'm going to back up just a little bit and give you a little bit of a preview. Tessa and Jen at some point were in foster care together when they were young. And that's how they knew one another. And Jennifer went on Facebook looking up all her foster siblings or people she had been in foster care for some reason unknown to the state. And that's how she found Tessa and knew that Millie and Layla were her kids. She began to tell folks that, oh, we were really close friends, we were good friends, and that's why the defect said, okay, this is a good person. This can be a fictive kin placement versus being a foster care. These kids can be with somebody that is kind of close to their family. But that's not true, ladies and gentlemen. You'll hear that at some point, Tessa and Jennifer did not have a good relationship. There's some backstory about a guy that they didn't like each other over. So it wasn't this, oh, this is my foster sister, and I really just want to help her out. It was just a lie. And you'll hear when she met folks and she talked about how she had the girls and why she got the girls. Some people she would tell, oh, Tessa reached out to me and asked me to get the girls. Oh, DFACS reached out to me and asked me to take the girls. All lies. And then when folks would ask her, or not even ask why the girls were in foster care, oh, they were being physically abused by their parents. Telling outrageous stories of what happened to the girls when they were in the care of Tessa. All lies. You'll hear that she lied about the girls going to daycare. I don't know why. It's just, some people just lie to lie. But the evidence will show these girls were never in daycare. They were never in school. She lied about the girls going to counseling. When they were with them, there wasn't any counseling going on. But that's what she's telling people. So I guess the girls kind of close to her because that's what she would use to cancel visitation with family members. Because Peggy still wanted to see the girls. And she would say, oh, the girls have counseling. They can't see you today. I believe the evidence will show us because they were bruised up and she didn't want anybody to see them. So she told that lie of counseling. Doctors, she would lie to folks and say, oh, the girls were sick, I had to take them to the doctor's office. The evidence will show there were no doctor visits on those dates that she was claiming they were doctor visits. There were no hospital visits, there were no ER visits, except for when she was harming the girls, and we're going to talk about that. The injuries. You will see over the course of this trial, from the time these girls get with them, they are having injuries. And I know kids are small, they fall, they bump their head, and they do all kinds of things. But consistently, a bump on the head, a burn on the hand, a bump on the leg, a bruise on the eye, all under their watch. So much so that Miss Lambert said, hey, to DFACS, not still believing that facade. I just don't think they're ready to handle kids. It looks like they're not supervising them right. Not that they're abusing them, but I think they just need to pay a little bit closer attention to these kids. Jennifer would say, oh, they fell in the playground. Oh, they got hurt at daycare that they didn't attend. Oh, they fell down the stairs or they fell off the bed. No doctor's visits for that. the story that she tells about falling down the stairs inconsistent with the injuries that other medical professionals saw. Just a web of lies. And then you heard about broken bones. We asked y'all about broken bones. On October the 19th, she showed up to the hospital again with Layla, and this time Layla has a broken leg. And she tells a gamut of lies. First, it starts out with, she fell in a hole at Nana's house, and that's Peggy Banks. You'll hear that Peggy Banks had not seen Layla and she had not been to her house. And in fact, there are no holes in the backyard at Miss Banks' house. Just a lie. Then she coupled it with, oh, she fell at gymnastics. First, let's start with, she was never even enrolled in gymnastics. A lie. Second, let's start with, I don't know if any of you have kids that have gone to gymnastics class. I think a couple of you on the jury said y'all had some experience with that. She was 2. So she's in that toddler phase on stage. She's on the little, I think it's like the ice slide, where there's padding everywhere, no high bars, and they are supporting them on every step that they take. Not possible that she broke her leg at gymnastics. But you got a child with a broken leg and you got to explain how it happened. And what does she resort to? What she always resorts to, a lie. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the most egregious lie of all came on November the 17th of 2015. At 5:42 p.m., a call came in to 911. Oh, I have a child. She's choking on chicken. You'll hear the EMTs rush there. When they got there, first of all, on the phone, you'll hear her giving CPR, asking about CPR. And then you'll hear her say, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't want to hurt her. We'll talk about that. But the EMT arrived, thinking we have a child that is choking. We got all our equipment ready. We're ready to try to help this child get whatever's lodged in her throat, because that's what choking means. Something is obstructing your airway. There is something in there that cannot allow you to breathe. When the EMT gets there, they begin to check. They check her breathing, find that she's not breathing. But also they find there is no obstruction. The EMT will tell you, I did what I'm supposed to do. I put her over. I gave her a couple of back blows. Nothing came out. But when I turned that baby over, what I saw told me, this is not about choking. This is something way different. And you will see the photographs, ladies and gentlemen. It is horrific. But she continued with her lie. She was choking on chicken. The EMT will tell you, we put that baby in there, we had to intubate her. We're giving her compressions. She does not have a pulse. And when we intubated her, we're thinking it's going to be difficult because there's something in her airway. Easy to go in, not a problem, because you know why? Another lie. There was no chicking, there was no choking. What the evidence will show is that there was a severe, brutal beating that day. And we're going to be clear, it wasn't the first time. This one was just the worst one. They get Layla into the ambulance and take her to the hospital. And because it's a baby, they'll tell you she didn't have any breath. She didn't have any pulse, but nobody wants a baby to be dead on their watch. So they worked and they worked and they worked. When they got her to the hospital staff worked and worked and worked. But it was too late. She was gone. So everybody, as you have to do when it's a child that is dead, let's stop, let's take a breath, and let's look. And when they looked, what they saw shocked their conscience. Layla was bruised from head to toe. The doctors will tell you that she had abrasions to her ears. And you'll hear from the expert who will tell you that is a telltale sign of physical abuse. And they'll go through, because kids, that's a protective area. So it's hard to get a bruise there unless somebody caused it, by pinching, slapping you, or doing something that causes blunt force trauma. She had bruising to her neck. Once again, a protected area. That's what your head is for. Little kids, they got big heads. So their necks are real protected. But she had bruising all along her neck. Bruising on her chest area. Bruising on her arms. And you'll see that there's this mark on her stomach that nobody can explain what it is or where it came from. But what you will hear over the course of the testimony, it wasn't there before she got with them. Abdominal bruising. And ladies and gentlemen, they talked about, oh, bad CPR, could have been the CPR. It's bruising down here. You ain't doing CPR down here. CPR is up here. Bruising in her groin. I don't know how other way to get there except for abuse. Maybe a couple of stumps. Abrasion all on the inside of her thighs, on the back of her thighs. Abrasions to her hands, injuries to her palms. That the doctors will tell you what can be consistent with a PAP, some blunt force trauma. Bruising on her shins and bruising on her feet. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're not going to sit here and tell you that every bruise on that baby was a part of abuse by them, because she was a kid. But the most egregious ones in those areas where doctors will tell you, nah, kids ain't getting no bruises falling on the playground or falling down the stairs, not there. Those are the ones we're talking about. Bruises all in her head. And not just the back. You know, a kid may fall, hit the front of their head, they may fall, hit the back of their head. The top of their head. What she was doing, diving off the stairs onto the top of her head? I doubt it. Maybe she was getting bust on the top of her head. Bruises to her butt. And they'll tell you this is a fleshy part. Hard to bruise unless it's some real serious force coming behind it. With a hand, with a belt, with some object. As I said, bruising to the back of her thighs. And the most extensive bruising on her back. From her neck down to her butt. I'm not done, ladies and gentlemen. That's not all what she did to this baby. And when you look at those outer bruises, because that's what we just talked about. We talked to you about those inner bruises. Those outer bruises, they're not all new. They're in different stages of healing. So like I told you, the evidence will be clear. This wasn't the first beating that Layla had suffered. But we're going to talk about those internal injuries. Her tibia, which we talked about, was broken and healing. She got it treated because it probably hurt so bad the baby couldn't walk. At some point, you got to do something. So she did get that set. How she broke it, I don't know, but I can tell you it wasn't at gymnastics. Her arm was broken. It was broken in such a way when the ER staff took a step back, they said, what's wrong with her arm? It's bowed out. It doesn't look right. So they x-rayed and said, this arm has been broken. And it has not been treated, and it's healing. The healing of it is not proper. It's so improper that you can see the outward bend of it from outside of her skin. Never been treated. And I'm going to tell you, I think some of y'all had some broken bones. And if you got a broken bone, the evidence will show that it's going to hurt. And you're going to know that a 2-year-old has a broken bone. So if you sit in the house and she's holding her arm and you don't do anything, you're just as culpable as the person that broke it. Posterior rib fractures. And we talked about CPR, and I know y'all probably got tired about it. But that's what they're going to tell. Oh, she broke the rib from CPR, but I want you to pay attention. I didn't go to medical school, wasn't smart enough. So posterior, I'm like, what does that mean? Her back. The back rib. Not the front where people expect if you're pressing down you might break a rib. But what's interesting about that rib fracture that she had, it was old. It was healing. It wasn't even something that happened that day. It was from another beating that she had given her a couple of weeks ago. injuries, I told you, all in her head, and unfortunately you will have to look at the autopsy pictures, and they're horrific. But what's interesting about our bodies is even the things you can't see from the outside, when you open it up, the bruises in her head, not just one, not just two, but multiple, in places that you wouldn't expect from just a normal 2-year-old falling down from play. And then you'll see that in some of the autopsy photos, the injuries from the outside that you couldn't see. But the ones that caused her death, ladies and gentlemen, a lacerated liver. That means that she had so much pressure, so much force, so much blunt trauma to her abdomen that it pushed all the way back to her spine, and with such force, it caused her liver to slice. And it's not a little slice, it's a big slice. So that means that was a big force. Not something you would get from CPR. A laceration, hemorrhaging, and internal bleeding. Basically what that means is she was bruised all in the inside. Her organs were bruised and broken and bleeding. And the worst injury of all, what ultimately caused her death, was her pancreas was transected. Your pancreas comes in one part. When they opened Layla up in that autopsy, it was in two. That's just how hard she had been hit by this defendant. Or stalked, or kneed, but with such force that her little body could not take it, and her organs began to split and tear and rip. And then she bled to death. And they may say that, it may have looked like choking, but what she was doing was suffocating and dying due to the internal bleeding that had been caused by this defendant. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to be clear, and I want you to pay attention when they're talking the medical talk, that we're not just talking about internal bruising from November the 17th. She got old, healing internal injuries in her abdomen. So when they try to tell you CPR from that day, a lie. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that's Layla. So the hospital staff is thinking, if this baby looked like this, what's going on with that other baby? So they pull Millie in, who is sitting at the side of this defendant, because everybody's believing that facade. Everybody's believing that, oh, they are just this big, happy family. All wrong with them. These babies, oh my God, she's lost a child. We need to gather around her. A facade.
Excuse me, that was my poster you just threw over.
Excuse me.
Oh.
Pick it up.
A facade, ladies and gentlemen. That's what they want to show you, this picture-perfect family. But that's not what it was. When they pulled Millie in and they checked her, bruises, not as severe as Layla, but enough to let you know that she was also being abused. She has what they call petechiae on the side of her ear. And the doctors will tell you it goes from her ear down the side of her face onto her neck, consistent with blunt force trauma, like a slap. Not from just regular child's play. Petechiae on the other side of her neck. So I want to be clear, on this side and on that side. So they come and, oh, she fell down. Did she fall down and bounce on one side and bounce to the other? The evidence is going to show that's not what happened. Redness to her right cheek. Large bruises on the inside of her arm, like a big bruise on her arm. Near her elbow. Small little bruises all over her body that could be consistent with childhood play. But then the worst, all along the side of her hip, wrapping around her back and down to her buttocks. Bruises, different looking bruises, different stages of healing. And then they said, well, this one child, she had broken bones that hadn't been tended to. Let's do an x-ray and see about Millie. And what do they find? She has a healing fracture to her elbow. Not from gymnastics, not from any playground, but from abuse. Now, during jury selection, as I said, the defense talked to you a lot about CPR. I don't know what Ms. Mull is going to tell you. She actually doesn't have to tell you anything because the state has the burden. But I think they're going to talk to you about she was choking. And I told you how that is inconsistent with the evidence that you'll hear. Accidental CPR, doing it wrong, bruises that are old and healing. Bruises down here, bruises on her back, bruises on her head. That's not from bad CPR, that's from abuse. Not, oh, they're bumps and bruises. No, they're not. Some of them are, but most of them are from abuse. It's a facade, ladies and gentlemen. And it's time for them to be exposed to you. And that's what the state intends to do during this trial, to bring you evidence to show you the truth, because that's what we're all here seeking, the truth. And I can tell you it's not going to come from that table. What you have to do as you look at the evidence, as you process it as it comes in, is look at it in totality, the totality of the circumstances. Not just one thing, but all of it. And when you look at all of those things, you'll see that there's no evidence of any food in her throat, so there's no choking. You'll hear that the medical doctors will talk about a transected pancreas, a lacerated liver. I think she had bruising to her intestines. Old abdominal injuries is not consistent with bad CPR. And I don't know if they've even seen a case where you've had all of those injuries from bad CPR. It's a lack of cases because it just doesn't happen, because that is not what the evidence is going to show that happened in this case. And I told you, extensive and old and new bruises. That's not from a one-time incident. That's from weeks of abuse. The evidence is going to show when these babies were with them, not one day of peace. Oh, they got nice, pretty pictures. They dress them up and they put bows in their head. And when they get them home, they beat and brutalize and terrorize them. And on November the 17th, they murdered Layla Daniels. Healing fractures. And then if this is bad CPR, a one-time incident, why do you, this is what's important about the evidence. There is a second child who wasn't choking on chicken, who has broken bones and bruises all over her body. Ladies and gentlemen, I told you this is a facade, and they will be exposed during this trial. The unpleasant reality, and unfortunately you are the ones who will have to make that unpleasant reality known to everyone in this courtroom, is that they are guilty of each and every count of that indictment. And at the end of this trial, I will ask that you find them as such. Thank you.
See, this didn't belong to the state. This was not an exhibit of theirs. It's an exhibit of ours that they purloined, that they stole right beneath our eyes and used in their case. And that is symbolic for the way they are handling this entire case. This case is about a brief period of time, 3.5 months. 3.5 months between July and November of 2015. And be sure you keep that in mind. 3.5 months when Jennifer and Joseph Rosenbaum volunteered to become foster parents for 2 little girls who had been taken away from their parents because of meth usage. You will hear that DFACS does not terminate parental rights for nothing. These children were taken away from their parents. Jennifer, herself a foster child, when she was growing up, had known Tessa Clendenny. And what the state does not tell you, and what is important for you to know, is what the state chose not to tell you. What the state chose not to tell you is that Tessa Clendenning was more than delighted to have them, the Rosenbaums, taking care of their children. Not only were they delighted at the beginning, they were delighted in the middle, they were delighted up until the end. You will hear Peggy gave statements, Kim Smith, Peggy's sister, gave statements to police. This cannot be abuse. This cannot be anything the Rosenbaums did. You will hear that DFACS workers will tell you that Jennifer had those children clinging to her. They loved on her and Joe. Both girls loved on her and Joe. You do not love abusers. You do not cuddle up with abusers. You will hear evidence that Jennifer took them wherever she went. So this notion that you have heard that she wasn't taking them out in public, you will hear evidence and you will see proof beyond a reasonable doubt that she did take them out in public. In fact, there are pictures for almost every day that these children were in custody of Joseph and Jennifer Rosenbaum. You will hear that she loved them, that she dressed them, she sewed for them, she made sure they were taken care of, she made them healthy foods, made sure they ate healthy foods, and outfitted their bedroom with all the toys a child could want, plus a TV, plus a tablet, so that the children could learn educational things on their own iPad and play educational games to learn new words and numbers. You do not do this. The evidence will show you do not do this when you are abusing children. During this time, Jennifer was a third-year law student at Emory Law School. Joseph was a corrections officer. They traded off responsibility for the care of the girls, but there were times when the girls were under the care of Jennifer Rosenbaum and Joseph had to work. He was working 2 jobs, not 1, but 2. He was also working security. So he was gone most of the time. When he was working a job and Jennifer had school, what did she do? Well, she let the children stay with babysitters at times, family members, people that she trusted. She also took the children with her, took the children to law school. And you will see pictures of that. You will see pictures of the children sitting in law school and behaving themselves, coloring. You will see all that, and that's evidence that comes to you directly from something concrete. It's not something that is yelled at you at the top of one's voice. It is merely and completely a true artifact of the time period that you are being asked to sit in judgment for. Lots of times, Joseph was not there. Joseph suffers from cystic fibrosis and diabetes. He frequently had to go to the doctor, had to go to hospital visits, and so he was not there on most occasions. He was frequently, on those occasions, Jennifer would pack them up and take the girls with her, wherever she went. Was it to class, to commission meetings? Because yes, as Ms. Young told you, she was running for Henry County Commissioner. So she took them to commission meetings. She took them with her wherever she went. The Rosenbaums loved the girls, and the girls loved the Rosenbaums. You will hear from DFACS workers that the girls were comfortable in the home and that they loved on Joe and Jennifer. You will hear evidence that the children participated in extracurricular activities and went to church daycare. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you have heard wild accusations against the Rosenbaums, wild accusations against the defense, And I ask you just to hold the state to its burden and to their lies and to their misstatements too. Because as you will see, the children did go to daycare. You will also see that the state is misinformed. They went to daycare, they went to church, they were with babysitters, they were with Rosenbaums, they were with other people. Millie in particular enjoyed gymnastics, and you're going to hear a lot about gymnastics. You're going to see pictures taken from that time, not recent pictures all doctored up, as the state would have you see. You will see pictures from that time of what the gym looked at that time. You will hear evidence that Layla had taken a class with her mommy, with Jennifer. She took a pre-class to see if she would be really interested in doing that. And then after that, she would accompany her big sister to class. Jennifer would stay and watch them, and Layla would be there as well. They also had regular doctor's visits at this time, and you will hear that there is absolutely no evidence of abuse at that time, or at any time during the 3.5 months that these children were with the Rosenbaums. You will hear about the fractured leg, and this occurred over some time. It was not due to gymnastics. It was due to a combination of things. Millie told Jennifer that Layla fell at her Nana's house in a hole. And Layla, in fact, was favoring her leg, and Jennifer noticed that. But it seemed to be getting better. There was a visit to gymnastics, and the girls were playing on the bars. The equipment was out there, and people, unlike what you might expect, parents were allowed the run of the place, and they were able to play on the equipment unsupervised. Layla was playing on the bars with her mother. She slipped off the bar and fell on the mat. No one thought anything of it. No one filed a report. No one thought there was any problem. Later, when the child was unable to put any weight on the foot, they went to the doctor. And what ensued was not claims of child abuse, but putting the child in a soft cast, directing the child be placed in a hard cast, and that was all done. Like most younger folks today, Jennifer and Joseph took pictures of everything. They took pictures constantly. You will see those pictures. There are over 2,000 pictures that were taken of these girls. That is not what an abuser does. They documented their lives with Layla and Millie by photographing them and trying to build memories of their time together, a time they thoroughly enjoyed. Then tragedy struck. And you're going to hear Miss Lambert talk about a bruise here, a bruise there. You will also see and hear DFACS workers tell you unequivocally they saw those bruises too, and they were in fact healing. They were not fresh bruises that were done by the Rosenbaums as they visited with these girls. And you heard Miss Young tell you that this child started her life with the Rosenbaums in a hospital. Well, let's talk about the truth instead of manufacturing the truth here. Let's talk about the truth. What happened the first time they had her, they went to a party, to a barbecue, employees barbecue for Spalding County. The child ate, the child seemed fine, and then the child started throwing up. She returned the child and said the child is throwing up. The child was taken to the emergency room and in fact had a viral infection. Now, to blame a viral infection on the Rosenbaums is a little much. And you will hear that this viral infection was throughout the household in which the child was living at the time. Tragedy struck on November 17th, and their lives would be changed forever by that. While eating dinner, Layla began to choke on a piece of chicken tender. Not a chicken bone, as has been reported by the media, not a piece of bone, but a chicken tender. Jennifer was the only one home at the time, and how do we know this? Because Joseph was at Spalding County Correctional Institute where he worked. She reacted instinctively to help Layla, and what the state keeps talking about is CPR, CPR, CPR. What they don't mention, and I did not hear said once in opening statement, was about Heimlich maneuver. And you will hear that there is literature, in the medical literature, about the Heimlich maneuver and how, if misapplied, not done properly, it can cause the rupturing of pancreas. That is documented. The doctors will talk to you about it. You will hear about this. Not from the state, but you will hear about it from the defense. The defense is going to bring to you, even though we have no burden to do so, don't have to do a thing, we are going to be calling a number of witnesses. We are going to be calling the former medical director of the GBI. And he is going to help you go through the medical evidence and see it for what it really is. And I ask you to wait to make your decision until such time as you have heard from everybody. It's very easy to do what the state and the media have done in this case, which is just sensationalize it to the hilt and not care about the due process rights, not care about the fact that what has to be done is it has to be tried in a court of law. If you heard the state's opening argument, immediate question is, why in the world are these people here? Why are they pleading, signing their name, and said not guilty? Everyone knows if you plead guilty, you get a better deal. Why are they saying they're not guilty? They're saying they're not guilty because they're not guilty, they're innocent. She reacted instinctively to Layla by attempting the Heimlich maneuver. And she did that over and over again. And you will hear that that involved the back and the chest and the stomach. And you will hear that Jennifer was not trained in either CPR or Heimlich maneuver. What she did was what she saw on TV. And unfortunately, what that meant was the child was subjected to adult CPR and adult Heimlich maneuver. You will hear from the doctors that there is, and from the EMTs, that there is a reason why you do not do adult CPR and adult Heimlich maneuver on the child. You do not use your two hands to do compressions like you see done for adults. You do not pound on the back like you see done for adults. What you do is you use two fingers and you press gently back and forth. That is not what happened to Layla, unfortunately, that night. And that haunts Jennifer and will live with her forever. She did CPR, she did the Heimlich maneuver over and over again. She used a knife to hold down the tongue while she swept, trying to get the food out. You will hear that the child threw up. In fact, there was chicken in the sink. Jennifer had the child up against the sink, and the child ejected the chicken. So that explains why they didn't find anything in the throat. You will hear Jennifer's 911 call. You will hear how she's trying to take direction. By the time Layla, the paramedics had arrived, Layla was still alive, but just barely. She died shortly thereafter, on her way or at the hospital. You will hear that the EMTs and the police left Millie with Jennifer. Millie and Jennifer came to the hospital together. You will hear from Samantha White, who is the caseworker assigned to Jennifer and Joe's foster parenting of these children, tell you that she could hear Jennifer's wailing from the minute Jennifer got there. She was in the hospital and Jennifer was in the parking lot. And yes, you can be sarcastic and try and malign Jennifer and Joseph. You will hear people say, well, she didn't cry when I saw her. But you will hear that she cried mightily when she got to the hospital. She cried mightily when she could, when she was grieving, and we don't all grieve the same way. She came to the hospital, and events were about to take a turn that neither Jennifer nor Joseph could have anticipated. What was a horrible accident was going to be turned into a vendetta against these two folks. A vendetta that has continued to this very day, to this very minute, when Miss Young got up here and continued that vendetta. Someone has to be blamed. A child is dead. Someone has to pay. And what they're doing is mixing bad medicine together with sensationalism and blaming the first easy target instead of looking for the truth of the matter and seeing what really happened and seeing it for the accident it was. During the course of this trial, you're going to hear a lot of evidence about Jennifer and Joseph, mainly about Jennifer. You will hear that Jennifer, a young lawyer in training, could be brash. She spoke her mind. She enjoyed getting involved in politics. She was running for county commissioner. She was an up-and-comer in the legal community. You will hear that at times she could be critical and outspoken against politicians, and that eventually she sought to run for office against an incumbent who was very much liked. She sought to run against him, and that did not please the powers that be. You will hear that Jennifer did not hide her views and didn't hesitate to speak her mind. She made enemies in Henry County government. She criticized her opponent. She criticized the police chief of Henry County and referred to some officials as corrupt. This is not how you make friends, but Jennifer is young, and she saw herself speaking truth to power, of trying to change what she perceived to be a culture of corruption in local government. As a result, when this accident occurred, there was no shortage of folks to relish her comeuppance. Her political opponents set out to make sure she was painted in the worst light possible. This fervor took on a life of its own, and as the evidence will show, the police, 3 DA's offices, and the press all rushed to judgment and labeled the death a murder instead of seeing it for the terrible accident that it was. An accident gets a brief mention in the paper, but if you can talk about a killing, as Ms. Young put it, a murder, and about liars, that becomes grist for the media to sensationalize the story, boost their ratings, and they're here doing exactly that today, and we'll be here for the next week, 3 weeks that we will be here. In the end, that destroyed the lives of Jennifer and Joseph Rosenbaum, who were only trying to improve their community and make the lives of these 2 children better. You heard the indictment, 49 counts. How many counts does it take to say murder, aggravated assault? Do you need 49 different times to assert it? That is more vendetta against Joseph and Jennifer. There are 49 counts. There must be something to it. And that's the deceptive part on the part of the state. They are wanting you to decide based on emotion and alarm. The indictment of Jennifer and Joseph turned the public against them before the first piece of evidence was examined. You will see how this rush to judgment poisoned witnesses. You will see how the community was led to believe, for example, that Layla had been starved. That was a story that went through the press at one point. You will see that that was a notion made popular by Detective Thompson, the leading detective in the case. He came up with this idea all on his own, without a scrap of medical evidence, based on his seeing Layla once at the hospital and decided she had been starved. He took out warrants saying she'd been starved, and that was communicated in some way to the media and then to the general public. That mistake informed his conversations with witnesses and family members, and as a result, you will hear that Millie, after she was left in the care of her biological mother and her great-grandmother, Millie was said to have exclaimed to one of the foster mothers, "They don't put food in our bellies." Or on another occasion, that Jennifer fed Millie but not Layla. The truth, however, is not what Detective Robinson stated and took out in his warrants. The truth is that according to the state's own doctors and according to the medical examiner that the state used, both girls were well nourished. That means they were well fed. But that is not sensational. And that is not reported. Another notion put forth by the police was the idea that because Layla's anus was dilated, she had been sexually abused. That ran around town. You will hear that this too was a total fabrication, either based on ignorance or an intent to malign Jennifer and Joseph. The truth of the matter, you will hear, is that there was no abuse, sexual or otherwise, and that the dilation of the anus is a normal occurrence when a child dies. Is a normal biological function of the body shutting down. But before they came to this conclusion, the state had sought warrants for DNA and had released this information to the wider public. prejudicing the community against Jennifer and Joseph by passing along information that was manifestly untrue. You are going to hear accusations that when the girls were with the Rosenbaums, they showed up with bruises. And you will see the pictures of these bruises. And you will hear about, basically, you're going to hear about the type of bruises that children get into, especially children who are rough and tumble. And you will hear that these girls played, and they played hard. The bruise, the scratch to the knee, the knock under the eye, a bruise on the wrist. Those bruises that you will hear Miss Lambert talk about were bruises that occurred before the Rosenbaums came on the watch. You will hear that those bruises were healing and old. You will hear that DFACS was made aware of them and that they made a conscious decision that these were healing and old, and even if they were Rosenbaum's watch, they were the regular rough and tumble type bruises that kids get. Then you will hear that the child had these other bruises, the bruises that were documented and talked about by the state. Her back was covered in a bruise. And what you're going to hear, again, misstatements that you're going to hear, is old injuries and new injuries. You're going to hear that the bruises, according to the state, were in stages of healing. And you will also hear, the contrary to what the state says, and the police told Samantha White, bruises cannot be dated. It used to be thought that bruises progressed according to a color chart, and that you could tell the date of a bruise from its color. That is no longer valid science. And you will hear that from Dr. Sperry, and I imagine you will hear that from Dr. 𝐓𝐢𝐬𝐴, who is the medical examiner in this case. However, that story was perpetuated, and it too reached the ears of the witnesses, the family. The conclusion was exactly what Ms. Young said here today. Oh, she's been beating her every day of her life. The truth of the matter is that those bruises were acquired on November 17th, when Jennifer tried to save this child's life. It is outrageous to suggest otherwise. You will hear she had that extensive bruising on November 17th. Again, what you will not hear is as important. She did not have that bruising on November 16th. She did not have that bruising on November 15th. She did not have that bruising on November 14th. And the reason was it all happened on November 17th. And the reason for that is that it was caused, bruising was caused essentially by Jennifer's efforts to save her while performing the Heimlich maneuver, pressing hard on her chest while trying to dislodge the chicken, blocking her throat, which she eventually did dislodge. Jennifer bent Layla over a sink to allow her to vomit and to try and force the chicken out. Unfortunately, she was just doing what she had seen done on TV. The result is that without intending to do so, Jennifer exerted pressure that went right through Layla's torso, lacerating her liver and tearing the pancreas in the process. But you will also hear that the Heimlich maneuver is known to do that, if not applied correctly. At some point, you're going to hear about the word intent, whether there was an intent to kill, an intent to harm. There will be no evidence of an intent to kill or to harm. It'll be up to you to decide whether Jennifer intended to kill Layla. You will hear her actions, you will hear her voice, you will hear her speak. As we believe the evidence will show, she accidentally caused the death in her haste and panic to revive and save her. And you will hear Dr. Sperry say that Jennifer and the children were very close. You hear that they hung on her and that she was very proud and happy to be taking care of her. There will be evidence that Millie was questioned over and over and over again. You will also hear about forensic interviewing. Forensic interviewing, when it comes to children, is the means by which you are supposed to interview children. You're not supposed to ask them questions. You're not supposed to let their mother ask them questions. You take them to a forensic interviewer, and that forensic interviewer is trained and asks non-leading questions, non-conclusory questions, and gets, hopefully, the truth as a result of that. You will hear about various 2 or 3 forensic interviews that this child had, and at no point did she give a statement saying that Jennifer or Joseph did anything, knew anything, said anything, nothing. She laughed when it was suggested that she might have been abused. She laughed when they talked about, were you physically punished? You will hear that each time she told the interviewer, the caseworker and medical professional, that she did not hear or see anything, and no one ever hurt her or her sister, except for Layla's father, Anthony Daniel, who touched her private parts. She was asked about bruises on her body, and those bruises were not patterned bruises, they were not belt marks, electric cord marks, but bruises you get from being active, rough and tumble 4-year-olds, and she said she got those from falling down while playing and while doing gymnastics. But that was not what they wanted to hear. So what did they do? They sent the child to therapist. She didn't say anything. Sent her to another therapist. Meanwhile, she's living with her mother and her grandmother, great-grandmother, and then all of a sudden the child started repeating things that she had heard. You will hear in this courtroom the latest revision. You will hear that all through the time that she was asked, there were different stories. You will hear that the parents, she's now adopted, she and her 2 other sisters, Tessa had 2 children during the time these events were unfolding. Those 2 children and Millie are now placed, they're now adopted by Amanda Harrell. Millie is Millie Harrell at this point. You will hear what is the latest revision of history. She has grown, as she has grown older, her memory of being 4 years old has gotten clearer instead of fuzzier. You will hear that her adoptive mother was concerned that she was making stuff up. You will hear that her mother and her great-grandmother went to the doctor to try and find out why she lies so much. So keep that in mind when you listen to Millie and to what she has to say today. That she has been subjected to 3 forensic interviews, countless amounts of questioning and talk by her mother and great-grandmother. You will also hear that the therapists were concerned because she had been privy to inappropriate conversations by her mother and great-grandmother. You're not going to hear much about Joseph, because Joseph wasn't at home when Layla choked on the chicken. He was working the 2 jobs. He was not able to spend as much time with the girls as Jennifer did. He stayed with them when his wife had an exam, when his wife had to go to school, and when he was available. But often the girls were asleep, playing with each other, or on the tablet when he was home from work. There will be no evidence that this man was aware of anything. And the reason why is nothing happened in that house until November 17th, when Jennifer tried to save that child's life. He did not know about any abuse because there was no abuse to know of. Even Millie said he was good to them. Yet he's here. Again, why is he here? Because the police and the district attorneys have rushed to judgment and figured if they charged him, he would be so terrified, he would testify against his wife. That's all they wanted. But that would require Joseph to lie. There will be no, I repeat, no evidence that he saw, should have seen, believed, should have believed that his wife was abusing the girls, and that's because she wasn't. The unavoidable truth of the matter is that accident happens, and that sometimes accidents cannot be prevented. You have well-meaning individuals who intend to save the child's life, administering the wrong kind of resuscitative efforts, and instead going through the pancreas and the liver in the efforts to revive this child. The law deals with accidents through the concept of intent. If there was no intent to cause harm, if there was no malice, there's no criminal responsibility. The evidence will show that Jennifer and Joseph's only intent was to provide a loving home for their 2 foster children, and that Jennifer's efforts to save Layla before and while on the phone with 911 resulted in a tragic accident she will have to live with for the rest of her life. You will not see 1 iota of evidence that shows she ever intended to harm Layla, much less that she and Joseph abused her or her sister. You will hear plenty of evidence, on the other hand, that the Henry County Police and the District Attorney's Office saw this case as an opportunity to put a woman who had been a thorn in their side in her place, to poison the community's mind towards this couple and ruin their lives. Now they are placing their lives in your hands, trusting that you will live up to your oath. And I'm going to ask you to take their lives as seriously as you possibly can. Listen to the evidence. Listen to what the people say and question everything. That's why you're here. It's not a decided matter, much as the press would like to make it out to be. It's not a decided matter until you say it's a decided matter. You should listen to the evidence as it comes from the witness stand and from the exhibits, as the judge has told you. Not from the press, not from the newspaper, not from the TV. After you have done that, I will be back up here to ask you to return a verdict of not guilty on all counts, because a verdict is Latin for speaking the truth. And the truth of the matter in this case is that Jennifer tried to save that child's life on November 17th. Jennifer did everything she could to save that child's life. That is the truth. I thank you for keeping an open mind, and I thank you for your service to the cause of justice.